This is Passport to Everywhere.
I'm thrilled to welcome my guest today, Bill Bensley. Known to many as a jack of all trades, Bill is an avid traveler, one I love to get tips from. He's a visionary architect, interior designer, artist, and landscape designer. He's really redefined the concept of hotel design. And if you have stayed at a knockout 5-star resort in Asia, chances are very high that it was one that he designed. His work serves as a testament to both human creativity and sustainable tourism.
The most valuable thing you can do as an architect or interior designer is to travel and learn from different cultures, because that enriches everything.
Welcome to Passport to Everywhere with Indigare's Melissa Biggs-Bradley. Melissa is the founder and CEO of Indigare, a travel and media company committed to inspiring and empowering people to change their lives and the world through travel, while having a positive impact on the places they visit. On the show, Melissa will reveal behind-the-scenes look at some of the world's most treasured places, transport you to dream destinations and hotels, and introduce you to some of the most extraordinary people she's met on the road. This is Passport to Everywhere.
After graduating from Harvard and venturing to Asia in the early 80s, Bill founded his company, Bensley, in 1989. Today, he has offices in Bangkok and Bali, and he's assembled a dynamic team of 150 architects, interior designers, artists, and landscape architects, who together have crafted over 200 extraordinary projects across 30 countries, ranging from iconic hotels and resorts to spas, homes, and even palaces. Today, we'll discuss the inspiration behind his hotels Shinta Mani Mustang in Nepal and Shinta Mani Wild in Cambodia. Plus, we'll dive into the exciting projects he has on the horizon. We'll also talk about Bill's work through the Shinta Mani Foundation and how he's paving the way for a new age of regenerative tourism. From his conservation efforts in Cambodia's Cardamom National Forest to his innovative projects incorporating renewable energy, Bill's philosophy is simple yet revolutionary. Create spaces that give more than they take. You'll hear about all of this and more as we explore how his unique blend of creativity, curiosity, and commitment to our planet and its people continues to push boundaries in the world of travel and hospitality. Bill, thank you so much for coming on. I am such a fan of so much of your work. I would love to start at the beginning because you're a legend. You've spent the last 35 years as an architect, an interior designer, a landscape designer. You have the greatest title in terms of number of hotels at a 5-star level that you've built. But you have always called yourself an outsider to this industry that you are a legend in. And I want to go back to the beginning and how you found yourself in this career, because I know it was not a straight path.
It wasn't. It involved a wrong phone number. When I was in high school, I was actually in charge of the career studies program. And I was calling everybody that you would expect to have at a high school. And I was calling the Anaheim Fire Department. I grew up next to Disneyland in Anaheim, Southern California. And I called the Anaheim Fire Department and I got Rocco Campanazzi, M. Purkis Rose Landscape Architects. Can I help you? And I said, oh, I need to talk to an architect. Can you come into my high school instead? And Rocco Campanazzi, who I'm still friends today with, came into the high school and showed me slides of Knott's Berry Farm. And I went, wow, God, yeah, it's so cool. You get paid to do that. And he showed me all the gardens that he was doing on the rides that he was designing and so forth. And that summer, I went to his office and emptied trash cans and sharpened his pencils and did some simple drafting for him and enrolled at Cal Poly Pomona. And that was it. That was the start.
That's unbelievable. You went from that to Harvard.
Yeah, at Harvard, I studied architecture under Moshe Safdie. I did my undergraduate in landscape architecture. Then I moved on to urban design and architecture. And I met my great friend, who's probably Thailand's greatest architect. And then I joined his office, and we had an office together for many years.
Give us some context, because this was pretty out of the box to go and work in Thailand as an architect.
Well, at graduation from Harvard, Lex said to me, like, where are you going to go, Bill? And I said, well, not really sure. And he said, well, why don't you come out to Singapore? So I did. I did exactly that. And I got on a plane, got to him, knocked on his door after traveling for 4 months in Europe. I arrived on his doorstep with about 14 bucks in my pocket. This is a real story. And then the next day, I went to see landscape architect office, Belt Collins. They hired me on the spot. And the next week, I was on a plane down to Bali. And that was in 1984. There was no paved roads, or very few paved roads. There was very few cars. There was no traffic jams. And it was paradise.
And what were some of your first projects in Asia?
I worked with a fella named Mani Wijaya. That was his Balinese name. His Australian name was Michael White. And he was a landscape architect, interior designer, extraordinary purpose, difficult to get along with everybody. But he taught me a whole lot about the idiosyncrasies of Bali. And I became a Baliophile and learned everything I possibly could, read everything I possibly could about Bali, and then learn the language as well.
In terms of your career evolution, talk me through the hotels, how you got involved, and what you've seen in terms of Asian luxury differing from the rest of the world.
As far as my career is concerned, in the first perhaps 8 years or so, I did one Bali garden after the next, one Bali hotel after the next. And I was doing Bali gardens in India and Bali gardens in Vietnam, and et cetera, et cetera. And I had it up to here. And I didn't want to be put in that box. So I said, hey, let's do some architecture. And I went to one of my clients here in Thailand. And I said, hey, I want to propose on this particular Four Seasons project in Koh Samui. And he said, okay, you can do it, but it's going to be for free. And I said, fine. And I proposed and he liked it and we built it. And then same with other things at Four Seasons in Langkawi. I proposed to do the interiors, and I came with big, long huge scrolls of interiors and so forth without any contract, just because I wanted to do it. I wanted to do something different than Bali Gardens. I wanted to do something out there, and we got the job. So we were a whole bunch of landscape architects at the beginning, and now we've grown into primarily 100 different architects and a few landscape architects, a few interior designers, a horticulturalist. We've got 5 fine artists and so forth. And we do graphics and signage and uniform design and everything that everyone touches. But it all became that way because of curiosity. There's a curiosity and a willingness to learn and to try other things and get out of that box.
I love that. And I've stayed in Langkawi and it's amazing. I've talked to you in the past, and I know that when you're working on a project, you kind of develop a whole story, an idea that goes so much further than just a pretty place to sleep. All of your hotels have a personality and they have a substance and a soul to them. How does that work? And give us an example and talk us through the process.
Okay, so I'm sure you've been to my Capella down in Bali.
Yep, I was so excited to finally see it because you and I have talked about that particular project, but please share with everybody else because it's an amazing place.
One of the key things to my work as an architect is, and very critical to what I do as an architect, is based in landscape architecture. It's being able to understand the idiosyncrasies of Mother Nature and how things drain and how trees grow and what their root systems are, and et cetera, et cetera. It's knowing intimately what you have to start with and how to mitigate damage. When I'm given a beautiful site like Suito gave me, he's the owner, Suito gave me for that project, the first thing in my mind is, as a landscape architect, how do I protect this? Because what I do, no matter what it is that I do, it's not going to get better. It's going to be worse than what Mother Nature has given us. So it's all about mitigating damage. And the way to mitigate damage, in my mind, is that you have to understand and know how to work with it. So in this case, Melissa, we put everything, all of the buildings were small. And they're small because, very simple, they fit between the existing trees. Number 2, they're up on stilts. Why? because one of the ways to mitigate damage is to not change natural drainage patterns. And if you can get those two right, then you're off and running.
Am I right in remembering that you did not take down one tree on that property to build?
That's always the case. Not one stone, no grading. There's a minimal amount of interference with what Mother Nature has given us.
It's amazing. And then in the tents themselves, they're all named after different people. I was in the horn collector's room. A friend of mine was in the photographer's room. Another one was in the one by the rice paddies. And you brought that sort of into the decor. You upcycled a lot. I mean, I love the story of how that resort was furnished. Can you share that a bit?
We had so much fun going to the garbage dumps. It was, and Suito, my good friend and collaborator on this project, he loves going through garbage dumps and junk shops, all those places in Legian and in all over Java we traveled, and just buying really interesting stuff. And we would then take that really old, really junk, and then we would spend 6 months on rehabilitating it. And that's how to get really interesting interiors, is to be able to work with treasures of the past and repaint it. And then, all the beds were tiny little beds, but we made molds off of the existing bed heads and so forth, so we could extend them and make them work for 2024. That's the key. Because everyone expects everything to work perfectly, and it doesn't always happen with off-the-shelf antiques. So it's all about the correct modifications.
Yeah, I had the ice box in my room, so to speak. The mini bar was one of those cowhide covered trunks, and you open it up, and I mean, it's the last thing you would expect to have a modern mini bar in it, but it was just fantastic. Similarly, I had one of those wonderful old rotary phones at my bedside, and it did work. And I mean, just all of it was rehabilitated so beautifully.
Thank you. It's too easy to build things with everything brand new. And everything with hotels today doesn't have to be brand new, especially if you're trying to tell a historical story like we did.
Bill, going back, was there a moment when you realized you had really hit the big time, in a sense, as a hospitality architect, when you had a project where you were competing for it and you knew, okay, this is very important and is going to lead the way to a lot of other projects?
Honestly, Melissa, I think that our best work is still ahead of us and that we might hit big time soon, trying really hard.
You're very humble because, I mean, honestly, how many projects have you done in how many countries?
I think we worked in about 36 countries or so and done well over 200 projects. Yeah.
That's incredible. So I want to get to some of the ones that you're working on now that are super interesting. You've got one in the works in the Republic of Congo, and I would love to know what inspired that and hear a little bit about it.
Well, you know what is that for many years I've told everybody that I've ever met that I really want to work in Africa. One is because it's a place of great need and conservation. Two, it's because I really like their design language. And it's a design language that I haven't had the opportunity to learn yet. That's very inspiring to go to new places. And that's why I travel to 36 different countries and so forth. That's why I really reach out and try to work in as many different places as I can, because as an architect, the most valuable thing you can do as an architect or interior designer and landscape architect is to travel and learn from different cultures, because that enriches everything. So back to Congo, there was the Plattner family out of Bavaria. Germany reached out to me and said, hey, we've been doing a lot of good work in South Africa and in the Congo for many years, and we want to build these 3 camps. And they knew of our Shinta Mani Wild project in Cambodia and said, are you interested? And I said, hell yeah. And I flew to Bavaria to interview. Then I flew to South Africa to interview, and I got the job. And I was so happy. And it's a tiny little job, but it's so cool, Melissa. We're in the northwest part of the French Congo, not the Belgian Congo. There's 2 different ones. Belgian Congo is very dangerous. I used to have projects there. And then in Brazzaville, That's the capital of the French Congo. And we're right up to the north and the west. And there's a place called the Tri-National Park, which is this huge piece of land that covers three countries: Cameroon, Central African Republic, and the Congo, French Congo. And our three camps are within that park, almost right on the border of the Cameroon and Central African Republic. And they're tiny. Each camp has 4 rooms. And they are in the most incredible environment. In fact, have you seen Our World with Richard Attenborough? It's a BBC production. It's a wonderful production, but Richard Attenborough goes to all the most interesting places around the world. He has one episode called Forests. And he's flown into this one place called Belly Bay. And he's standing in the middle of the forest and he's saying, "This place is the most remarkable place. And it's the only place where the elephants come to have cocktails with the gorillas every day at 5 o'clock." And that's true. And that is my site where he flew into. It's called Belly Bay. And these forest elephants, which are much smaller than the plains elephants, and these gorillas, which there's more gorillas there than Rwanda and anywhere else in the world. And they come and they eat the minerals that are in that particular part of the forest. That's why there's a big clearing, because the elephants for centuries, if not millennia, have been clearing that forest.
That's amazing. I'm dying to get there. And I also want to know about Shinta Mani in Mustang, Nepal. And that's another project that is fascinating. Will you tell me about how that came about? We've already had some of our staff and our clients there who just loved it.
Oh, wonderful. And yeah, you did a nice article. Thank you. That was beautiful. Well, you know what is it? I started going to Nepal back in the 80s, and I love Nepal and fell in love with going there. And I'd probably been there 100 times. I had some work there and such. When I was going there, of course, Nepal was off limits. You couldn't get in. You had to have special permission from the king and so forth. So it's always been a place that has fascinated me. And then my good friend Jason Friedman, he's been doing some work with the Sherpa family up there. And so he brought that to my attention that they wanted to do this. The Sherpas wanted to open a small lodge in Mustang. And that was someplace that I'd always wanted to go. In my house in Bangkok here, I've got this huge collection of Robert Powell paintings. And I've known him since the early 80s, but he's been doing these exquisite watercolors of Mustang. I have maybe 20 of them or so. So long story short, I used all of his work by way of prints in the lodge. And then we took very much a Shinta Mani Wild approach and said, to really understand that valley, you've got to be there for 5 days. And I think that was a wise thing to do. So it's totally immersive. We take you everywhere that you feel comfortable, and as high as up as you want, as low down as you want, as far as you want. It's, spa and everything's included, but it's all about being exposed to this very fragile community. And it's a community that will very easily disappear if it's not treated with respect, much like much of Bali has gone.
Can you talk a little bit about the culture and the community and what makes it so unique? I mean, it's a high mountainous area.
Very high mountain. It's in fact, we have oxygen on standby in the hotel. And, one of my architects, in fact, we had to fly him down. I'm great with it. I love it. I never had problems with elevation, but it's a hotel that's not for everybody. It's for the very, very adventuresome. As I said, the community is very fragile in that for many years, there's the youngsters have left the valley because Kathmandu and Pokhara and so forth is so much more appealing. You can get Wi-Fi there, right? So, and it has all the appeals that young people want. So one of our goals in Shinta Mani is to re-energize some of the tiny villages, and not by building new shiny stuff, but to take those old 400-year-old buildings and to leave the exterior shell as it is, or fix it, but to be able to bring the interiors to 2024 to make them comfortable and so forth. So by gently injecting capital, but without changing the look and feel and the way it quacks now, because that's the real beauty. If we can go there and be able to bring a very few guests, I mean, I'm talking about little satellite hotels of 5, 6, 10 rooms, maybe very high end, but super low impact. Melissa, that's the key, is super low impact.
You're listening to Passport to Everywhere, and I'm your host, Melissa Biggs Bradley. For more on the latest hotel openings and travel news, head to indagare.com and sign up for our free weekly newsletter. And if you're interested in more hotel legends like Bill in bucket list destinations, be sure to check out my past episodes with John Hardy on Bamboo Indah, his beautiful treehouse hotel in Bali, and James McBride on Nihi, his hotel on the incredible shores of Sumba, also in Indonesia. Now, back to the show. I would love to have you share with the listeners the story of Shinta Mani and how it began, what your goals are, and how it's evolved. I've got to see the earliest one in Siem Reap, and obviously Mustang is the most recent, but you also have Shinta Mani Wild, and it's evolved. But I think your goal was kind of the same from the beginning. So I'd love to hear in your words how it started and where you're going.
My involvement in Cambodia really started in the late 90s when, the Khmer Rouge were still shooting each other and everyone else. And there was coffins being hauled down the main street, and it was all dirt roads at that point. It was kind of a mess. When I was recruited by my great friend Sekun Chanprida, and we worked together and opened a hotel at the site of the old Hotel de la Paix, a new hotel called the Hotel de la Paix, which is now the Park Hyatt. And when we opened that, it became a real center for the arts for not just Siem Reap, but for Cambodia. So all of the famous artists from Cambodia that now have studios in New York and London and such, they had their first shows with us. Because I took our lobby, and I made it in such a space that's very multifunctional. And we had artists lined up every single month for 2 years. So that was great. But when we started that too, Melissa, that there was no other hotels there. So we had to train people in order to work in the hotel. We had a little guest room, a guest house where our Shinta Mani is now. And we used that guest house in the kitchen there in order to train people. And we would train, 20 people a year or something. And then we had enough people at Hotel de la Paix, but it was so, rewarding that of us training, and people would go out and get jobs and not necessarily with us. So we didn't have the guts to close it. So we just kept the training school open. We just started 35 new students, but every year we've got about 30, 35. And you know what? Every single student has gotten a job. And we had last November, we had our first reunion, and we had kids coming back that were, that were at the time eating garbage off the dumps in Phnom Penh just to survive. And now they're managers of hotels in Singapore and Dubai. And it was so wonderful to hear all of these great stories.
Hotel de la Paix, the Park Hyatt, is now a beautiful one of, I think, the sexiest urban hotels I've ever stayed in. Thank you to you redoing it. But Shinta Mani, the guest house, is also a great small hotel in Siem Reap. I go for lunch whenever I go there if I'm not staying there. You can actually see the students learning, but they're also waiting on you and working the hotel. And it's a great small hotel.
Yeah, thank you. We're TripAdvisor #1 restaurant in Siem Reap. We've got a great chef who's going all over the world now cooking. It's really working.
I'd love to have you explain a little bit about the foundation and how that evolved, but also Shinta Mani Wild, because you sort of started with that guest house and it's expanded to much more.
Well, both Sekun and I, when we were working there, of course, we would go out into the countryside and we see these very poor people. I remember one family I went to, and she had no daddy, and 6 kids, and they were anywhere from ages from 2, and the eldest was 7, I think. And so very prolific production of children. And they were just living on a pile of sticks. And, the 3 youngest ones were extended bellies and serious malnutrition and so forth. And it just hit me in the gut, and I just started crying. It's just, it hit me so bad. And I just thought, I got to help these people somehow. So then little by little, we collect clothes and from people and books and paper and school supplies and all that little stuff at first, until today. Now we've built almost 300 homes and delivered 7,000 bicycles and graduated hundreds of kids and made our place, Shinta Mani Wild, probably the safest place for wildlife now in Cardamom National Forest, by way of paying for lots of rangers to do. And we've delivered thousands of water filters, and I started a program for delivering baby formula for the youngsters, because there's a lot of babies that still grow up with malnutrition. So we're working with Siem Reap Hospital, and now we're distributing formula to dozens of kids, and I'm sure that'll grow a lot.
Wow.
And that's just the tip of the iceberg, Melissa, what we're doing.
That's amazing. And so you mentioned briefly Shinta Mani Wild, but I want to go back to that for listeners who don't know. It's not only is that, I think, the only hotel in the world I've ever heard of that you can zip line into, but it's in a really special forest. And so this is where Shinta Mani is not just helping communities, but you're doing conservation work.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah. In fact, our focus then has shifted from people to animals. Right? Let me back up a little bit in that the Cardamom National Forest, which sits at the southwest portion of Cambodia, it runs along the ocean, is about 4.5 million hectares. And that forest provides the rain for the rice bowl of Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam. And there is a huge demand by everybody that lives on its edges to cut it down and to profit from it. And what the villager doesn't understand is that if it gets cut down, that their neighbors won't have any water in order to grow their rice, and it all falls apart. So there's a few very good people like that I work with, like Wildlife Alliance and Conservation International and so forth, these big groups that are funded internationally. And through Shinta Mani Wild, we fund them also to ranger those forests. We have together about 160 rangers that carry AK-47s, travel in a minimum of 4 people together, and they patrol the forests. And that's a big job. That works out to something like 37,000 hectares per person. It's such a huge job. So much of that work is done by helicopter as well. In the 7 years that I've been doing this, we've picked up now 14,000 snares. And a snare is a piece of wire from tree to tree that's strung in such a way that if a baby elephant or a clouded leopard or a pangolin walks across it, it wraps up like this and will hang if it's light enough. But it'll be captured and will stay there until the person that set the poacher, person who sets the trap, comes back and picks him up. And if he's lucky enough to get it out, he'll take it to Phnom Penh, or we go on the wildlife trade, and it'll be sold for thousands of dollars for people to eat. That's what's happening. So we've picked up 14,000 of these snares already, and we've picked up we've seen something like 1,000 chainsaws. For many years, it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But now at Shinta Mani Wild, we're seeing the light of day, and the gibbons are coming back to us. So we've got many families of gibbons. The hornbills, on Saturday, I saw 4 hornbills. I heard what I think was like 5 different families of gibbons. The pangolins are there. We know that. The civets are coming back. The terrapins are being released there on my property. So it's all good. This year we've got a program which is really cool, where I'm doing an enclosure. An enclosure, it's for the bears and for whatever other animal that needs a rehabilitation halfway house. And it's the final step from being captured by a snare to being released back into the wild. So it's a place to keep an animal for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, so he can get rehabilitated back into being able to make sure that he knows how to find his own food. And then he goes back into the wild. So it's a big pen of about 3 or 4 hectares of land.
It's amazing, Bill. And I know you mentioned that a lot of this is done in patrol groups of 4 with AK-47s. And the reason for that is because, as you said, these animals are worth a lot of money and people are desperate, and this is their livelihood. And this is not just a simple walk in the park. I mean, you're going after criminals, and criminals will fight back.
That's right. It's not playing around. I really admire the Rangers of Wildlife Alliance because they are so damn brave. I had Vladimir, who's been working for us for about 12 years now. And I remember when I first started 7 years ago, he had been captured by the villagers because he had arrested one of the villagers who was a poacher. And he had been captured and was held for 18 hours, but that didn't stop him. He's out there every single day doing it.
Wow. So, Bill, I talk to you and I look at your projects, and, to me, you are really leading the way in what some people are calling regenerative tourism. Hopefully, the future for more and more people in this industry is thinking about what are we giving back to the places that are giving us such a reward. I'm curious how you've seen things evolve in recent years, and where do you think it's going, and how can this get even more momentum?
Well, you know what, Melissa? Since COVID, I've been getting more and more involved in the foundation, and the work we do is that the more you get out there and tell people about what you're doing and say that you need something, more people are willing to give it. It's really gratifying. And, I said, hey, you guys, we're doing this and this. Could you help us? And right away, it's just really great. The future is being bright. And then I met a company called Give Power, based out of the United States and Kenya. And they said, they asked me, what do you need? And I said, well, we need power for the ranger stations and so forth. 500 small sets of solar power for individual houses that are off the grid. No problem. Got it.
I love to hear that. You talked earlier, Bill, about how important it is for architects to travel, or really anyone in design, to learn design languages from around the world. I don't know how many countries you've been to now, but I know you travel enormously. I'm curious, what are some of the design languages that have been the most impactful for you?
Well, last year I traveled to 9 new countries. Now I've been 106 countries. And we did all the 5 stands, which was fantastic. Never been there before. And then did much of the Silk Road in Montenegro, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia. And that is a very ancient design language, that dates back to when the Silk Road was active. During those trips, I did something like 100 sketches on site.
I mean, I could spend an hour just talking to you about your Silk Road trip. But if you had to pick, Bill, sort of one of the most profound travel experiences that you've had, and it could be within the last year or it could be in your whole lifetime, what would you say it is and why?
This summer, for the second time, I went to Greenland. And not many people get to Greenland. Have you ever been there? Never.
No.
No, never have. And it was wonderful to meet with the Inuit people and to go fishing with them and spend some time with them. I love fishing, and I go to Mongolia, catch and release, of course, but I go to Mongolia every summer for 2 weeks and get off grid. And this year I did Mongolia and Greenland, and it is a marvelous country that has very little tourism.
Bill, I'd love to ask you just one last question. What do you think the greatest gift of travel has been for you?
Travel. The greatest gift of travel. God, there's so many gifts. The greatest gift of travel has to be the ability of understanding, how to say that if you understand that we're all are so different and we all have our own agendas and we all have our own backgrounds or histories, and that we might not always get along, but that's also a big, beautiful part to this world. That's the most interesting thing that makes things tick, the idiosyncrasies of different countries.
Thank you so much, Bill. I always love catching up with you and hearing what you're working on. I cannot wait to try your new hotels and go back to some of the others that I already love.
Wonderful. Yeah, it's great to catch up with you too.
Thanks so much, Bill.
Bye for now.
Thanks so much to Bill for joining me today as we uncovered his passion for giving meaning and purpose to design. To check out more of Bill's incredible projects, head to www.bensley.com and follow him on Instagram at Bill Bensley. That's Bensley. Coming up on Passport to Everywhere, I'll be taking you around the world to discover more hotel legends, from the St. Regis in New York City to Villa Lacoste in France. If you're inspired by today's episode, be sure to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts so we can reach more passionate travelers just like you. Thanks for joining the journey.
Thank you for joining us at Passport to Everywhere. We hope you'll join the journey and subscribe. For more travel inspiration, visit indagare.com. INDAGARE. This has been Passport to Everywhere.